The case is back in the news.
Attorneys for the Menendez brothers say new evidence shows that their convictions and life sentences should be overturned. What is the new evidence? It is a letter sent by Erik Menendez to his cousin, Andy Cano, 8 months before the murder. So that would have been back in December of 1988.
But now, decades later, the case is back in the news. Cliff Gardner represents the Menendez brothers.
We now have evidence that makes absolutely clear that those boys were molested. And if those boys were molested, it would have been manslaughter, and they would be out.
And guys, we actually just received a statement from one of the attorneys representing the brothers saying that he is encouraged that the DA is looking into this case so earnestly. So I call it like the 3 R's. What they're looking at right now with this writ of habeas corpus that was filed a year ago is that they could be released, they could be resentenced, or potentially retried.
Back in the day, it was decided that the evidence showed that they had made that fact up. But just last year, the DA's office in LA started investigating 2 new pieces of evidence that apparently change everything. The first piece is this letter that was found in a storage unit.
It's hard to believe, but it's been over 3 decades since Lyle and Erik Menendez were convicted for the brutal murder of their parents, José and Kitty Menendez. The crime shook the country to its core, but in the 30 years that have passed, the public's perception of the Menendez brothers has shifted significantly. What once seemed like an open and shut case of greed and violence has now come under new scrutiny, especially with advocates like Kim Kardashian lending their voice to the cause.
You can see someone's rap sheet and then just automatically form an opinion of them, but then if you understand why they got to the place that led them to make those decisions, you would completely change your mind. Some really deserve second chances, and just being open to hearing their story, I think, is just super important.
Today, the question isn't just about whether they killed their parents, that much is known, but about the trauma they endured as children and whether the years they have served should be enough to bring them freedom. Could new evidence finally give the Menendez brothers the chance they've been waiting for? Let's dive into the heart of what's happening right now. The District Attorney's Office recently responded to a habeas corpus petition filed by the brothers' legal team. This petition challenges their convictions based on new evidence that wasn't available during their trials. Instead of rejecting the petition outright, the DA asked for a 60-day extension to review the case.
Late last year, I spoke to Lyle Menendez about the new evidence in their case.
What did you think when you heard about these new claims and evidence?
I mean, for me, I just was happy. It's a burden to be telling what happened to and just have so much doubt in the public air.
This isn't a small thing. It suggests that the DA sees something worth investigating. This development has sent waves of hope through those advocating for the brothers' release. Think about it. If the DA didn't believe there was some merit to the new evidence, they likely would have denied the petition on spot. But they didn't, and that gives a glimpse of hope. This 60-day extension means we could hear significant news by November, and the possibility of resentencing or even release becomes more real by the day.
But I still firmly believe that evidence is strong in their favor, that it did happen. I believe that the brothers were credible and believable on the witness stand when they cried and they spoke about the horrible sexual abuse at the hands of their father. But they have corroborating witnesses who essentially say the same thing and back up their story.
The attorneys representing Lyle and Erik are optimistic about the outcome, especially given the more than 3 decades the brothers have already served. It's not hard to imagine that most likely scenario here is resentencing, where they could be released with time served. After all, there is a significant cost of holding a third trial. Reports suggest it could cost Los Angeles over $20 million. And with the brothers' lengthy prison sentences, many believe they have paid their dues.
No one knew about it at trial. It was never presented.
Another attorney for the brothers, Mark Garagos, also spoke, saying the reviewing of the new evidence is long overdue.
We've got a much more robust and evolved understanding of abuse. I think it's time. Their family thinks it's time.
But the legal developments aren't the only reason this case is drawing so much attention again. The public figures like Kim Kardashian have played a massive role in advocating for the Menendez brothers' release. Now, Kim is no stranger to criminal justice reform. She's worked on several high-profile cases using her platform to push for change. Her involvement in the Menendez brothers case has brought it back into the public eye in a big way.
But it's not just new evidence drawing attention to the Menendez brothers' case. Kim Kardashian calling for their release in a personal essay for NBCNews.com. You think you know the story of Erik and Lyle Menendez? I certainly thought I did, Kim writes. I have spent time with Lyle and Erik. They are not monsters.
Social media too has been instrumental in keeping these conversations going. Thousands of people have taken it to Twitter, Instagram, and other platforms, sharing their thoughts on the case, supporting the brothers, and even sharing their own stories of abuse. The parallels between the Menendez brothers' situation and many other cases of child abuse are clear, and social media also allowed those connections to be made in a very public way.
If you take those things into account, you've got two young men who've been horrifically abused by their father in their household for many, many years, all growing up. You have their mother who's not protecting them, who knows about it and is doing nothing to save them from this. To me, that's a household without love.
The brothers also have strong backing from their families. In fact, 24 family members, including both sides of their parents' families, have written letters supporting the brothers' release. That's no small thing. It speaks volumes about the kind of abuse Lee and Erik endured that their own family relatives are still standing by them decades later. It's a rare thing in a case like this to see such overwhelming family support, but it just reinforces the belief that the Menendez brothers were victims long before they became perpetrators.
I don't think it was a crime. It is a crime by statement. My joy would be that they would be set free, that they would be able to be human beings on a normal basis and not behind bars. They've been behind bars many, many years. I would love to see them free.
One of the key elements of this case revolves around new evidence that has surfaced recently. This evidence comes in the form of a letter written by Erik Menendez, which was found in a cousin's storage unit. The letter, written 8 months before the murders, details the sexual abuse Erik suffered at the hands of his father. For years, the brothers have claimed they have acted out of self-defense, fearing for their lives after enduring years of physical and sexual abuse. This letter, which has never been presented at their original trials, is a crucial piece of evidence that backs up their claims.
Cliff Gardner is an appellate lawyer for the brothers. He says the new evidence includes a letter that was recently found in storage that Erik reportedly wrote to his cousin 8 months before the murders.
Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I'm afraid. He's crazy. He's warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle.
But it doesn't stop there. Another individual has come forward, accusing José of abuse. This person, who has chosen to remain anonymous, claims that they were also a victim of José's predatory behavior. Their testimony adds significant weight to the argument that Lee and Erik were victims of long-term abuse. And it paints a very different picture of the events leading up to the murders. The inclusion of this evidence in the habeas corpus petition is a game changer. If the court finds this new information credible, it could lead to the brothers being resentenced or even having their convictions overturned. It's a major turning point in the case, one that could finally tip the scales in favor of the brothers.
The attorney for the Menendez brothers, Cliff Gardner, said he spoke to Roy Rossello, the former band member, Menudo band member, who came forward and told his story. He found him to be credible. He said with victims of sexual abuse, it's very painful to speak about these things that happen, and that it can take years for them to recognize what happened to them, or for them to choose to come forward and speak out takes a lot of courage.
As hopeful as this new evidence is, there is also concern over the public perception of the Menendez brothers has been influenced by recently media portrayals, particularly the Netflix series Monsters, the Lee and Erik Menendez story. While the series brought renewed attention to the brothers' case, it also generated a significant amount of controversy. Many viewers felt that the show sensationalized the murders, focusing on the more salacious aspects of the case without giving enough attention to the years of abuse the brothers endured. For the Menendez brothers' supporters, this was a frustrating development. Instead of humanizing the brothers and delving into the trauma that led them to commit such a horrific act, the series seemed to perpetuate the image of them as ruthless killers. The fear is that this could sway public opinion back in the other direction, making it harder for the brothers to get a fair hearing in the court of law.
And it seems like the monsters in this show are the brothers, but in real life they're not the monsters. They're actually the victims. Obviously, I'm only on episode 2, so I'm hoping that the rest of the season isn't going to be like this. I don't know if this is just a play on words and they're just doing like a hint of the story, but Ryan twisted it completely for his own viewers or something.
It's important to note how influential public perception can be in cases like this. With the Netflix series out there, many people form an opinion of the brothers based on the exaggerated, dramatized version of the story. The reality of their abuse and their circumstances leading to the murders may be overshadowed by the need to create a compelling television show. And while entertainment is one thing, the real-life consequences of how these brothers are portrayed could be devastating.
Another thing that the show did get wrong is the boys left the house immediately after unaliving their parents. Because of the loud noises from the gunshots, the boys really thought, okay, maybe the neighbors would have heard something, called the police. So they hung out for a little bit just to kind of like gauge the vibes and see before leaving the scene.
So what happens next? The court is set to review the new evidence in November, and that's when we'll likely get a better sense of whether the Menendez brothers will be resentenced or even released. Their lawyers are pushing hard for time served, arguing that the more than 34 years they have already spent behind bars is enough, particularly in highlight of the abuse they endured. There's also a broader conversation happening here, one that goes beyond just the Menendez brothers. This case is part of a larger reckoning with how the justice system treats victims of abuse, particularly male victims. For too long, the trauma that boys and men experience has been minimized or ignored altogether. The Menendez brothers case is a stark reminder of how abuse can shape the lives of those who endure it, and the legal system needs to take that into account when rendering judgments. Of their supporters, this isn't just about getting the brothers out of prison. It's about acknowledging the abuse they suffered and ensuring that the future cases like these are handled with more care and compassion. It's about changing the way we think about abuse and trauma and justice. As we wait the court's decision, one thing is clear: the Menendez brothers' story is far from over. With new evidence, public advocacy, and a growing understanding of the abuse they endured, there's a real chance that Lyle and Erik may finally get the justice they deserve. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen, but the possibility of their release has never felt more real.
Now, how many families do you know with 18 and 21-year-old children where the kids never complain, never say a negative thing about their parents? That is extremely unusual.
This is a case that has captured the public's imagination for decades, and it's not going away anytime soon. The Menendez brothers have spent over 3 decades in prison, but for the first time in a long time, there's hope on the horizon. Will they finally be released? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: the world is watching. As we get closer to November, we'll continue to follow this story closely, and we want to hear from you. Do you think the Menendez brothers deserve to be released? What impact do you think the new evidence will have on the case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.